Well, the shit really hit the fan here in Virginia the last 24 to 48 hours as it puts the Republican Attorney General, Jason Miyares, former delegate in the House of Delegates here in the state, and the Commonwealth Attorney, that is District Attorney for every other place in the universe, Steve Descano, a Democrat in one of the most populous and powerful counties in the state, Fairfax County, the county that prosecuted me, against one another. Here's the situation. So, when these Democratic attorneys for Commonwealth came in to office, a number of them in Prince William, where I am, in Fairfax County, in Loudoun County, in Alexandria City, or rather Arlington County, when they all came in, they had a little agreement. They said, you know what, we're going to stop prosecuting people for petty things like tiny bit of marijuana and things like that. Okay, it's not worth our time. We're understaffed, and we need to go after the bigger fish, and so they did. And that proved fairly popular among most people, I would gather. But this is an interesting one because Steve Descano has decided a politically motivated thing, in my opinion, and Jason Miyares has gone after him on the same, fresh from licking his wounds, from going after the former Loudoun County, the county just to the west of Fairfax, superintendent of schools, who was under indictment and facing some serious charges that he ignored the pleas of this girl who was actually raped apparently by this young man in the girl's bathroom, but this guy had done it a couple of other times elsewhere, and the school was accused of covering it up, and also retaliating against an employee whom he had dismissed. And Mayares waded into that scandal a couple of years ago and just licked his wounds and decided that he would drop it here a couple of weeks ago. So now he's freshly energized to jump into the Steve Descano situation. For Descano's part in Fairfax County, that Commonwealth attorney, district attorney, he has failed to go after a man who is a tier 3 sex offender, the person who has been accused, I should say, of a sex offense, right? Remember, not all sex offenders have actually offended. But this particular person uh, certainly makes an interesting case, all right? His name is Richard Kenneth Cox. And what Mr. Cox did is in 1993, it was, I believe, he had gone out and had some kind of non-consensual sex with a child, and then apparently did a no-no here about 6 months ago or so. I think July, during the summer season, where he went to a high school, and tier 3 people convicted of a sex offense are not supposed to go to school property, but the school was also using its pool as a public pool, and there's no prohibition, I believe, against that. So he went there and he was allowed to use the women's locker room because he claimed, this guy, last name Cox, Cox, ironic, that he was transgender. And the policy of Arlington County, which is largely liberal, is that they would respect the gender identity that you claim that you are. Okay. He went in, Mr. Cox. Apparently, he exposed himself to a number of people, including a 9-year-old girl, and he was arrested. They, cited him, I think, and took him into custody. But Mr. Descano, observing this policy, decided that it's a locker room, people are getting undressed. There was an option for the families in there to use the family locker room, and they did not do it. And I know this won't go anywhere necessarily with people in the USA, but in Europe and other places, in Japan and places, they do. Well, maybe not Japan anymore, but a number of places you have co-ed locker rooms, or you have a view of simple familial nudity as not a big deal. And again, I'm not advertising, I'm not even showing where I'm coming down on this story, because I really think it's a very, very difficult story. However, there's a bit more to it. So the Attorney General, Mr. Miyares, who likes to stoke these cultural issues, and as reported in the Washington Examiner, which is a right-leaning newspaper, goading the Washington Post, which is somewhat a liberal-leaning newspaper, for not covering the story. Well, the Washington Examiner refers to Descano as a George Soros-backed guy and whatever. I mean, Soros backs a lot of causes. The man is what, 96? And of course, let's not forget that the right also has their billionaires. Soros is a 6.7 billionaire, $6.7 billion billionaire versus Elon Musk, who is 368 billion. Many multiples times more of a billionaire. And you don't hear anything complaint on the right for that. But that's not really even the big issue either. Who funds whom, or the pissing match between Miyares and Descano. The very interesting thing is Jason Miyares has received a letter from our organization several years ago, now, a couple of years ago, complaining about the uneven treatment of people who are convicted of sex offenses. So there is, again, I hate beating a dead horse, but I'm going to do it again. There's a woman in Fauquier County, a former teacher, like I was, former teacher, but unlike me, and unlike several others, she actually had sex with her preteen students in her math class, male students, multiple times. But because Fauquier County has a considered, and largely a Republican leaning county, has a considered, what's it called, a restorative justice program where it's an alternative to prosecution and incarceration, which sounds like it may well be a great thing for a first-time offender. And so Ms. Grimley did not go and get hammered. She did not go to prison for up to 20 years. She did not get multiple fines. Her four, four class 4 felonies, okay? Class 6 felony, you get about 5 years mandatory minimum, but they get far more. I think she was up for 20 years potentially on each one. They miraculously went down to misdemeanors, which would give you less than a year in jail. And she had no jail, minimal fines, some community service, and she had to complete a 1 year program, 1 year program on this restorative justice, and she didn't even have her license yanked. Therefore, she could teach again. Now, maybe nobody in Virginia would hire her, but they would elsewhere. So compare that to several other people like Dr. Kilpatrick, of 35 years in prison for talking to somebody dirty who turned out to be a police officer. He claimed, the police officer that is, that Mr. Kilpatrick was interested in having sex with younger people. Ryan Pick, who is finishing a 7 year term where they didn't even show his face, and claimed that he had tried to go after somebody he thought was a 12-year-old girl. And the list goes on and on. I can go on and on about that, not to mention the people who actually had sex, like Grimley. But for some reason, when we wrote to the Attorney General, who talks in his letter that I'm going to post at the end here about the need to protect children and how they're a vital resource and how we need to make sure that the community is protected against these violent predators, said nothing about this. He had no problem with the disparity. He has no problem with the large number of people in Virginia and throughout the country, like me, and I could rattle off a list of other people who rather I don't mention their name, who never had any contact with an actual child at all, even if you dispute what we did, but nevertheless got between 2 and 15 years in prison. So exactly what is Miyares' complaint exactly? Is his complaint that Descano, which by the way he demands Descano turn over his caseload to the Attorney General's office, which has as one of its lead prosecutors the woman who had lied about what I supposedly did and linked two events together that were completely separate. The only thing that linked them was the lying police officer, Detective Robert M. Bauer, who had come up with the goofy idea. Okay. He's got her working for him. Her name is Elena Lowe. I'm happy to mention her name. Elenalowe. And again, the Attorney General is very, very concerned about safety issues. So, of course, he will want to investigate the Caitlin Grimley case right away. But lo and behold, the letters to him, the phone calls to him, to his deputy, to the Virginia Crime Commission, and Senator Serval and Delegate Herring, majority leaders both in the Senate and House respectively, never seem to return our phone calls on that. They never responded to the letters. We called their offices repeatedly. They never responded. So apparently, we're not concerned about that. To make it more idiotic, they have tried to pass a variety of laws that would tighten the restrictions in the so called sex offender registry that would make it more difficult on all of us. Even as what they really need to do is decide, where do we stand on these issues? Do we really want justice and fairness for everyone? Because in the backdrop to all of this, you have the sex offender registry, which has not been proven to actually save any children. We have this guy Richard, okay, Mr. Cox, Richard Kenneth Cox, who was in the ladies' bathroom, and the registry didn't stop that. It didn't stop it at all. Okay, and the issue of transgender, which of course is one of the Democrats' issues to protect people, and I certainly agree we need to protect all people. But at the same time, what about the people like me who pay taxes who are still being nailed by the sex offender registry, among other provisions, the people on probation who are constantly being hammered? What about them? So again, folks, where are you on this? Do you really want public safety? Then you need to look at the entire program and see how warped it is. How some people get 35 years and some people don't. And by the way, I learned about this from somebody who posted that this was on Facebook or Meta, this letter under Attorney General's the Virginia Attorney General's account. It was also on X. Well, we're not allowed on these if you've been convicted of a sex offense. Meta doesn't allow you to be on their platform if you've been convicted of a sex offense, unless you're wealthy, powerful, and well connected, like our current president. Then you can be on X. That's not a problem. But of course, what we want is parity and clarity and even up. We have people who are on tier three so-called sex offenses who are never ever been involved in anything having to do with imposition of a child, excuse me. And we have people who have done something that are allowed to get off on it and to be totally free of any kind of violations. We have people who are allowed to skirt it by using interesting arguments, like the transgender argument, and we have other people who are just simply told to the judge by the cop that they did it, and the cop accepts it as an explanation because it's testimony, and ignores all the exculpatory evidence. We really need to fix this, not only in Virginia, but elsewhere. So I don't know where I come down on this. I really don't. I've had transgender students. Transgenderism is real, it is a thing. But the Republicans have made it bigger than life. Like there are 4 billion trans people just trying to take over the country, which is not the case. At the same time, the Attorney General makes a very good case. What was this person doing exposing himself in there? He obviously wasn't just in a locker room, simple nudity like they have in Europe and other places. But at the same time, the Attorney General has an axe to grind. He's always looking for that cultural element to slap people around with. And where is he on all these other issues? Again, last year, the General Assembly passed a bill which allowed for people who had multiple DUIs to get their driver's license back more easily because they have to earn a living. People convicted of sex offenses and people on probation for that have to demonstrate that they can keep employment. How can we keep employment if you have a public registry where somebody can look you up, call your boss, and get you fired? And then you get in trouble on probation because you don't have a job. You don't have a job because you can't be hired somewhere. in the areas that you are trained in. And it takes time to be trained in other things. Meanwhile, you have to make a living. Meanwhile, they're heaping court costs on you. They're exposing you to ridicule, harassment. Your family's being attacked in schools and stuff, and they don't have anything to say about that manner of public safety or public decency. Nothing to say about that. They have a bill that they just fortunately killed, which would create a new registry for domestic abusers who also commit sex offenses in their domestic situation. Those people, they wouldn't even get on the list the first time. I got on the list for doing nothing, no sex talk, no pictures, and I'm on the list for 15 years. Okay. But somebody like that, no, they get a second shot. Second or third try they get on, and they can get off after 7 years by petitioning in court. I cannot petition a court before 15 years. Nobody on tier one can before 15 years. Nobody on tier two can before 15 years. And tier three never can, like this person. Okay, Kenneth or Richard Kenneth Cox, COX. So we really need to rethink these things, folks, and we need to make sure that we get the politics out of it. And Jason Miyares may want to read his mail. I know he knows how to write letters. I wonder if he knows how to read the damn things. So we got crickets when we sent this. Number of us signed it, crickets. No phone calls, no responses, because they're not interested really in saving children. They're not interested really in understanding that the registry doesn't do anything but cost us millions of dollars a year. They're not interested in understanding that none of the so-called protections that they put in place really have done a damn thing, because the problem lies elsewhere. So it's time that we start putting the politics aside and actually getting down to business and seeing what really, really works. Maybe we'll find out Descano went a little bit too far. Maybe we'll find out Miyares went too far. But what we have to do is get something that really is the most sensical thing. And tormenting children is certainly terrible, but tormenting adults is just unconscionable too, in the name of children, in the name of public safety, because it's dishonest among being just blatantly a violation of our rights, grinding us into the ground constantly. It doesn't make sense. And again, for those of you who are interested in public safety, don't come at me. Research it. Research it. I'm going to put the letter from Miyares down here. Appreciate your time. Thank you much.